All right, welcome back to Jiu-Jitsu Motivation Podcast. My name is Greg Melita, black belt 2nd degree, owner of Hampton's Jiu-Jitsu.
And I'm Brian DeLuca, black belt and author of Jiu-Jitsu for Small People and other weird shit I think about.
All right, guys, today we got an awesome guest. My buddy Eric Uresk is here in studio today. And we got a lot to talk about with Eric today. But first, I want to have him just go into his new instructional he's got, and then we'll go all the way back in history.
Sure. So just let me introduce myself. My name is Eric Uresk. I primarily coach MMA fighters. I am a black belt in BJJ and in judo. I wrestled Greco-Roman at a pretty high level and fought professionally for 10 years and spent the last 5 or so years coaching the world's best fighters all over the world in mixed martial arts. And so I just recently put out a tutorial for ground and pound. I felt like it was a area in the sport that was extremely lacking and was just a little bit behind technically, and I saw some holes that I thought that I could fill in some gaps and create a system that anybody can follow that's applicable for MMA fighters, combat jiu-jitsu athletes, and then also those BJJ guys that want to keep an opponent grounded that doesn't necessarily want to stay on their back. You know, like I think we're seeing a lot more in the higher weight classes, particularly in sub only, that guys aren't just voluntarily playing guard now. A lot of times they're getting back up to wrestle or they want to be on top. And so the old agreement of you're going to play guard and I'm going to play top is not necessarily happening all the time anymore. So I think it has its applications for everybody.
Yeah, we were actually talking about that off air. It's like, sport jiu-jitsu back in the day, the points structured because you had side control on the mount, you could strike the guy. But then, as time got on, evolution, you kind of lost that reality, if you will, that feel. And I think there's tons of jiu-jitsu instructionals out there. There's not a lot really that I've seen that really cover what we're talking about,
Well, I think what most people miss is how important it is to control where your opponent is and really keeping them down. Because like you said, most people aren't just going to lay there and go, okay, I'm going to pull guard, right? It just doesn't happen, and to me, wrestling becomes a big part of what you're doing to control your opponent, keeping them flat on their back, let's say.
Yeah, and where it gets really interesting is there's some guys that control really well, but they don't do much damage, right? There's guys that are capable of doing great damage but don't control very well, right? There's a few very special people that are able to do both. Khabib Nurmagomedov for one, and there's a handful of others that do a good job of not just controlling but also punishing the person on the bottom, which is essentially what ground and pound is, right? So what I wanted to do was fill in those gaps. When it becomes a grappling match and your arms are occupied, if your arms are occupied and actively pinning your opponent, you cannot hit them, right?
Yep.
And so it becomes about that, right? And you also get quite tired doing that in an actual fight. The opposite of that is I'm solely controlled on damage and I don't do any job controlling the bottom person. They're easily able to clear that bottom leg and get themselves back up. And so what I've done is gone ahead and created a system where you can actually control the bottom person with primarily using your legs and a few different concepts that you can check out in the course so that you're creating control and damage and hovering between the two so that there's constantly a system of bottlenecking, right? So bottlenecking is like, I want to force somebody into a narrow corridor where their options get few, right? And so if your options are few, then it's much easier for me to predict where you're going. And if I've done it enough times, I'll be able to make those predictions a little bit more accurately and ultimately pushing towards a finish.
So even besides with ground and pound, right? Even if you're setting up a submission, isn't it sort of the same concept, right? Like you're controlling, and then now you got to be able to occupy them enough or control them enough, but not be so controlling that you could actually set up your submission.
Absolutely. Yeah. The only difference I would draw there is that you do not have to pass the guard to actively pursue a finish when there's punches involved.
Very good point.
Yeah. That's a huge point. I mean, we're from the start. taught, all right, there's legs, get around the legs, and then everything happens from there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just ingrained in BJJ guys.
I was telling Eric a story. Like the first MMA class I ever took, I went into what Greg and I call third position of guard, and I got punched square in the face. Like I was like, what? My guard didn't work.
What's the quote, Eric? Every time you get hit in the face, you lose the belt.
Drop a belt.
Dude, and it sucked because I was probably a blue belt then. I went all the way back to white.
One shot. That's all it took,
One
right?
shot. I was back at white belt, man.
And what's the instructional called again?
Simple, effective violence, ground and pound. So simple, effective
Nice.
violence is the tagline of my submission grappling system, and then this is obviously a ground and pound course.
And it's a specific website, right, where people can get
Yes,
that.
I'll drop the link. So it's EU Subgrap, but I believe there's like a course in front of it. So
Yeah.
we'll drop the
We
link.
actually filmed some couple of unique concept technique videos before we started this podcast. Make sure you guys keep a lookout for that either on the Jiu-Jitsu Motivation website or our social media, and Eric's social media, which is Eric the Gentleman.
Eric the Gentleman. Yeah. That's
Very big time gentleman, local gentleman around these parts in the Hamptons specifically. All right. So yeah, let's go into that a little bit. We had met years ago a couple times, but can you talk a little bit, because just on your social media accounts, not even talking about the sport of MMA and Jiu-Jitsu, you talk a lot about just your upbringing and your childhood and your philosophy and how you actually started in martial arts and how that shaped you.
Yeah.
Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So for me, I had some like real weird ideas as a kid. So I didn't have like my parents around too much, and I didn't really have any guidance around at all. So most of what I learned as like a kid about like what a man is supposed to be, I learned from watching action movies, right? So I'm like,
Roadhouse.
Bloodsport, Commando,
Over the top.
yeah, all these crazy, extremely violent 80s movies. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, there was a lot of abuse in my house. So what I saw was like, okay, like the people that get love in this world, they learn how to fight, then they fuck everybody up. No one messes with them anymore. And then they get the girl at the end. Right?
which was the whole plan.
So this is the prototype that I'm going into my life with. So around fourth grade, I got bullied a little. I was a real tiny kid, and I got bullied a little bit, and I just something like snapped in me, and around 10 years old, I just started getting into street fights as often as I could, and I started keeping track. And I think by the time I was 12, I'd probably been in about 50 street fights.
Wow.
And I would just go out and look for them. And I was tiny. But and real early on, I saw that there's a social currency that's involved if you can beat people up, even as a little kid.
And this is Long Island, New York.
Long Island, yeah, Long Island, 80s, right? And so I'm getting this message like, all right, I'm not getting this at home, but I can get it outside if I just beat enough people up, right? And then guys are scared of me. I'm thinking like this is going to make girls like me. It doesn't really work like that, but that's what I thought, right? So that's what I'm going through life with, and that really just progressed. I didn't get involved in any. We were too poor to afford martial arts, so like I would go to like the book fair and get like a Taekwondo book. And I just thought all martial arts were the same at that point, and then go practice on my brothers, like the moves that I'm seeing in this book. Like I was obsessed with fighting. Like I really wanted to go to the Kumite, like John Clark, like Frank Dukes, and I thought that was the coolest shit in the world. So as I move into high school, I go to 9th grade, and I'm getting in a ton of trouble in this one school, and so I switched schools because things are obviously not going well here, and there's a wrestling team in this new school that I'm going to. So I went to West Hampton Beach High School, my second high school, and I was a natural at it. And real quick, I noticed this stuff works great in street fights. So I did the after postseason where they're doing freestyle and Greco, and I've never wrestled before, but I go ahead and I take 4th at state in Greco, and then I take 4th at the Northeast Regionals, and which is like the whole Northeast of the United States. And I'm like, oh, all right, I'm getting pretty good at this. So now I'm going out into the street and I'm suplexing kids on the concrete, and I'm wilding out at this time. I'm robbing drug dealers. I'm doing a lot of crazy stuff, and I'm robbing everybody. And I have a severe drug and alcohol habit, and now I know how to suplex people and
on the street.
And
same combination.
Yeah. And so, but for me, it's working, right? It's like everybody in the neighborhood is scared of me. Older dudes give me respect. So like I'm feeling good about myself at this point, and it's working for me. And I end up for the next couple of years in and out of jails, rehabs, mental institutions, homeless. So life's not going fantastic. And I get sent away to like a long-term drug and alcohol program that's also for like people with I had some mental illness as well. And I'm in there. I've been in this place for the better part of like 17 to 20. I was mostly in this place. I would escape for like months at a time and then have to go back under court order. And one day I'm jogging and through Ronkonkoma, and there's a judo school. And so I walk in, and Sensei Joe Terciano owns the school. And so he invites me to come in, and I come in. I think he charged me like $70 for the first month, and then he never charged me another $1 again. I was there sometimes 6 hours a day for like a year. And I had a wrestling background, so judo made sense. I was always fascinated by the throwing arts in particular. This is kind of, it was how I like to express myself. I felt like it was the best expression of my personality. It was throwing somebody or slamming somebody. And so I would go in there every day, and I had nothing else to do. I was like, it's either this or I'm going to go die in the street. So yeah, I was in there every day for a long time, and I started getting exposed to like Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a little bit more, and even Kung Fu. And, you know, this is the early 2000s. So like maybe just pre 9/11, maybe just post 9/11. So there's not any MMA gyms anywhere. There's like 1 or 2 jiu-jitsu schools at the time. Maybe the Sarah Academy might have been opened at the time, and Kyoto maybe. And then, you know, there's random martial arts schools, and maybe there's a boxing gym or a kickboxing gym, but no one training all together. So we're still kind of having these like impromptu, let's see whose shit works kind of sessions. Right. And lo and behold, at this time, like the wrestling and the bit of grappling that I knew at the time was holding quite well. And so it took me a little while to like finally get my act together. I would do good for a little while, and then I'd get dragged back out into the streets. And at a certain point, when I was 23, I basically got sober. I stopped doing drugs, stopped drinking, and started getting my life together. And I knew at some point, I had watched the UFC tapes, the videotapes, and I had seen that, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And even in high school, I was like, this is what I'm going to do when I get older. It's the only thing I really cared about. And so, yeah, that kind of got me started on my journey.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and speaking of Sensei Joe, he's our resident judo coach here. I mean, that says a lot that you started, you know, in judo there, and kind of, you know, took you under his wing, and, you know, $70 for the first month, you know, never charged you again. How long did you train with him? Like consistently?
I trained with him consistently, like daily for 2 years straight.
Wow.
And I got my black belt within that time. And, but I was in there, you know. It sounds like, you get your black belt really fast, but I was
6 hours a day in any.
I didn't have anything else to do.
Yeah, that's
you know, I'd go take the morning class, and sometimes I would stay there till the evening class, and whoever was in there, I just want, you know, maybe what am I, 20 years old at the time? I have nothing, like, I just want to train, and I'm sparring all day long, you know, and yeah, it's just that was it. It was like, this is the best opportunity for me to get this stuff out of myself. And,
at that time, you know, you're talking early 2000s. I had started in literally in 99. And then, you know, there's only a couple of schools, like you mentioned, you know, where we started Kyoto, and then, you know, Sarah, really, those are like the big and only jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu schools on Long Island at that time. And at that time, too, and MMA wasn't even really a term yet. You know what I mean?
No holds barred.
Yeah, it was NHB, Ballet Tudo, you know what I mean? And you had to go to all these separate disciplines. You had to go to a kickboxing place, you know, but if you were lucky back then, you know, maybe it was a mix of karate and kickboxing, and then wrestling, and then judo, and then, you know, strictly BJJ. Then mix it together somewhere where if the place didn't have like an MMA-oriented format, you know what I mean? It was way different back then.
And most guys, even if they were exposed in the same gym, it just happened that like maybe a boxing coach was maybe subletting or renting out space or taught one class. Like that's how you were exposed to boxing. You know, it wasn't like, okay, how do we combine these things?
No, it was very much the thinking was which style is the best. And back then, like if you were a black belt, like it was like you had the magic death touch. No one.
Well, the mysticism.
Yeah. No one really understood outside of that, like how to stop jiu-jitsu.
Right.
Yeah, you felt like you needed to seek out a Brazilian guy from Rio back then, like to find out what these moves were. Very different from nowadays, but back then that was the feel. I remember seeing a purple belt for the first time. It was like 2001. We were like, oh my god, a purple belt. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's so different now, but to think about that,
Well, think about how many schools back then were run by purple belts.
Yeah.
You know,
If you were a purple belt, you were a bad motherfucker. I remember what was that dude's name? Kenny.
Kenny was my first instructor.
Yeah. Kenny was a bad dude. I'm like, wow, this guy's amazing.
Yeah, he was one of my first instructors, 130 pounds soaking wet that guy.
Yeah, what's crazy now, we go, okay, purple belt. You know, like when you get to a certain point.
Yeah, there's no black belts.
Yeah, and here's the thing too, like if you look at a purple belt today, because there's so much knowledge out there, you know, there's some pretty badass purple belts, you know, now.
Oh, good. Purple belt today would fuck up most black belts.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, if not all of the black belts back then.
100%.
Absolutely.
100%. And then so you came up that way, Long Island, New York. You had those experiences, get into MMA. I remember when you opened up your first academy, Airborne, because he was just known for suplexing people. Had like this one video on YouTube, the meat locker. It's like this front guillotine, lifted this guy in midair, tapped him. So, you know, on that premise, it's pretty natural that the first school you open up is called Airborne, you know?
So I have a question. You talked about wrestling, right? Different styles of wrestling. You were doing off-season, like freestyle, Greco, like all the other offshoots. And then you went into judo. Which one did you find the most sort of translatable? Was it freestyle to judo, or was it, you know, the Greco-Roman? Because I like Greco-Roman. I have a lot of the clinching.
I feel like for me personally, Greco and judo were so closely related. I mean, yes, in Greco, you can't really like use your legs to trip, but you're constantly using your legs to jockey for position. And so, yeah, I just found it a little bit more relatable to judo than say freestyle wrestling, which is much more focused on like leg attacks and things of that nature. And the stance is much different. Obviously, you're much more bent over in a freestyle stance, whereas Greco tends to be a little bit more upright. Judo is generally more upright. Yeah. So I found those two closely related, and they're both brilliant. I think, you know, obviously, if you're not training with a gi on, wrestling is to be favored. But there's certainly a lot of things that I've drawn from judo that are applicable across the board.
Well, that's the importance of cross training. I mean, I truly believe that. And then how do you, I mean, because you're known, you know, on social media, you're known for the guy that's been literally all over the world. MMA training, the who's who in MMA. You know, you said before you got your jiu-jitsu black belt too. I mean, talk about being well-rounded. But what got you with the mentality of, all right, I got to get out of Long Island, New York, and go worldwide and experience all these things?
So the small little gym that I was training at for MMA, I don't even remember the name of it, but I was training with the D'Angelos at the time, and they were like, they had good experience in kickboxing because they trained with Derek Panza, and obviously they were trained at Kyoto in Jiu-Jitsu, and so they were kind of like, at least in Suffolk County, like the guys to go see as far as MMA was concerned. And I was bouncing in the Hamptons, and I was having a good time, but I knew, like, if I really wanted to take this thing further, I would have to go to where, like, there was better fighters and get, you know, just get that feel from those guys. So I had visited Las Vegas a few times for the wrestling national championships. Used to be for freestyle and Greco, used to be in Las Vegas every year, and so I would be in Vegas, and I would often do like my training beforehand at Mark Lehman's Cobra Kai, and so that was actually like, Vegas was the mecca at that time to like go train, and it's actually coming back again. I had a little dead period, but it's coming back again. And so, yeah, so I basically packed up my car. I had like $1,500 to my name and drove to Vegas. I didn't have a place to stay. I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything. I figured all that out within a week, and I started training at Mark Lehman's Cobra Kai. Eventually, the wrestling coach at Cobra Kai was the same wrestling coach at Extreme Couture. And so he saw me in the gym and saw that, you know, that I had some ability, and said, hey man, like, you should probably, if you want to really fight, like, this is a jiu-jitsu school, you should probably be over at Extreme Couture with the other guys. And I'm like, oh, could you, like, you know, at the time I didn't know how to like make that introduction.
Get there. Yeah.
And so, so he brought me over there, and I don't know, my first day on the mat, I'm training with Frank Trigg and Mike Pyle and a couple other guys. And I was like super starstruck, and just like, wow, I can't believe I'm training with these guys. This is incredible. You know, I watch these guys on TV. Right. It'd be like the equivalent of like if you like basketball and you get to go play with like LeBron James or something like that. Like that doesn't happen. It's interesting how much more accessible like fighters and BJJ athletes are as opposed to, you know, the 4 major sport athletes. Like you can't just walk on a fucking field and play football with the Giants.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it's true. Do you think that's because the way, like in martial arts, regardless of what it is, right? Jiu-Jitsu, judo, whatever, wrestling, you're looking for very different training partners?
I think that has a lot to do with it. Yeah, I think that has a ton to do with it. I think the fact that there's so much less money involved also has a lot to do with it, right? So like you're not essentially risking precious cargo, if you will.
Gotcha.
Even though to some degree you are a little bit, and a lot of times now, like guys that are a bit more established, they're not going to train with everybody. I won't train with everybody because I don't trust everybody and I don't know everybody. And if I have something coming up or yeah, just in general, like I'm looking for certain things and roles and I know what I want or need out of my training sessions. And sometimes it's not the overzealous blue belt that you know, is willing to risk injuring you to say that he did that to his friends, you know? So I'm not totally interested in that role as opposed to, you know, if I walk in, I'll probably stick with the purple to black belts most of the time, just out of keeping myself from catching a stray knee or whatever nonsense happens, you know, in the beginning.
I lost a tooth one time to a white belt.
Yeah.
You know, a knee to the face.
No, that's a good point. I mean, and it kind of go into that a little bit. We were talking offline too. You know, it all starts with what goal somebody has walking through the door.
Right.
You know, if a guy walks in your door, his goal is to be an MMA fighter. He walks into a jiu-jitsu school. How do you approach that versus the guy who walks through the door that just wants to break a sweat, or the guy that walks in the door and says, I want to learn how to defend myself? You know what I mean? So like, I guess the question is how would you approach a guy that's just a BJJ guy and now he wants to fight MMA versus a guy that just wants to fight MMA and he just did that from the beginning?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's wise to develop a base. There's some contention that that's maybe not the way to go, but I don't know. If you train, my wrestling coach was from Kiev, and he was a coach for the Soviet Union Olympic teams back in the 70s. And he used to say, you can't sit in 3 different seats. And what he meant by that was like, I was trying to do like other things at the same time. And he said, you have to pick a focus if you want to get really good at something. And so it's actually really interesting whole area of study. And it's something that when I'm running a team, this is something that I'm really big on, is periodizing your training. So I don't think it's great if you don't have a fight coming up. I don't think that you should be training all the disciplines all the time, right? So if you have a Monday through Friday and you're changing, like, and you're only doing one discipline maybe once a week, and then you're putting everything together on those other days, there's not a lot of mastery coming out of one day of training. And I know GSP was big on this. He would block his training to where, okay, maybe for 2 weeks or a month, I'm going to train with the Canadian national team and work on my wrestling, right? Then I'm going to go spend a month at Henzo's and really really dial down my jiu-jitsu, really put in a study on my jiu-jitsu, right? And then he would spend time with Phil Nurse at the Watt and really work on his kickboxing or so I'm really, really big on that. So I think it's imperative to see what your tendencies are and develop a strength, and not that should be solely relied upon, but I think it's fantastic to have a base. If that base can be wrestling, I think that's all the better. But having a degree of mastery before you go to start taking on other arts just makes sense to me.
Right. Do you think like, you know, and to me, most people like that first experience should be grappling? You know, like it's a combat sport like wrestling, right? It's usually easily accessible to most people because it's, you know, maybe in the public schools or whatever the case is, right? So do you think what happens is now that you see like these MMA schools coming out and they're focused on all these things at once, do you think that makes it harder for an athlete to be like super well-rounded as a wrestler or super well-rounded in one of those individual things? They may be a great fighter and being able to put it all together, but they can't really focus. Like their wrestling, even though it may be good, it's not going to be as great as it can be because they don't put focus on wrestling at one point.
Well, yeah, like I just said, like, you know, you kind of have to have MMA gyms, and there's very few coaches that put everything together well, right? Everything. Like I'm talking guys that can coach everything at a pretty high quality level. I would say like I would say Faraz does it real well. I would say you could probably put Greg Jackson in that group. And man, I don't know if there's a whole lot of other coaches that I can name off the top of my head that can coach all the disciplines really well. Right. There's some fantastic coaches out there, and some of them know that, and so they sort of they bring on other coaches. They know where their gaps are, right? But if you have a coach that can put everything together, they should be seeing that time needs to be spent, as we said, in mastery. So yeah, to answer your question, I think if you're training everything all the time from the beginning, you'll get pretty good at things. And who knows, maybe sometimes pretty good at everything is better than being really good at a couple of things and then having some holes. But I don't know, Adesanya, you would say he's a specialist, right? He's a striking specialist. He sticks within his realm and he does really well. Obviously, he's acquired other skills. You look at a guy like John Jones, he's a wrestler, but he's mastered, he's mastered striking, and from all accounts, his grappling isn't bad either. So yeah, you look across the board, and you'll see different answers to different questions. So I different answers to that question. I think it really lies in the individual, right? I think, and that's what's so crazy about fighting is it really does lie in the individual. Like some people are can make one thing work for them. It also depends the division you're in. If you're a heavyweight, you can suck at two things and be really good at one and win.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like heavyweights are the worst. They really are. And I like watching them fight, but they're the least skilled by far. Yeah. Because they don't have to be. It's just like there's so like if you're athletic,
right? You can get pretty people far around, and you got a lot of power. You
can get pretty far. But then a guy like Stipe, who was actually pretty well rounded. Like Stipe could grapple, Stipe could wrestle, Stipe could strike intelligently. He could do all those things really well. I don't know that he had the physicality that it's somebody like an Ngannou or something like that.
Right.
But as you see, like that physicality just at some point becomes overwhelming. At that weight and that size.
That brings up a huge topic with us. We talk all the time about is the individuality. Like a lot of times you see, people have the opinion where there's nothing worse than an MMA guy that's just trying to slap all the shit together, like be okay in boxing, okay in MMA, okay in jiu-jitsu. Yeah, I just want to learn how to defend an armbar. And then just the fights look like absolute shit versus a guy who is coming in with a blank canvas and trying to master Muay Thai. Not fully master, but get really good at it in a block of time. And a mastering in what they can get really good at in jiu-jitsu and then mixing it. But it comes back to the individual. Some guys can be in an MMA school and have 3 different awesome coaches in each different thing, and they're going to take from that and do it well. It comes down to the individual.
I think there's a mindset too, and so I've talked about this and written about this like at a pretty good extent. I think generally speaking, you have 3 different like subgroups of fighters, right? Guys that get involved in MMA, right? So you have the fighter, the guy that likes to fight, maybe not the most technical, maybe not the most athletic, but he's tough, right? He's the guy that nothing's come easy to him and probably works really hard, not interested in bettering himself through martial arts or anything like that, just likes to fight, right? Likes the thrill of the fight. Robbie Lawler comes to mind. Somebody like, he's a champion, and I would call him primarily a fighter. You have athletes, right? Guys that maybe come from specific disciplines where they were maybe a world champion or a national champion, a specific discipline. They're athletic. They like competition, right? They may or may not like to fight, right? They may or may not be trying to better themselves as a human being or seeking any kind of perfection. They just want to win, okay? Then you have the martial artists, right? The martial artist, in my opinion, is the guy that's on a complete path of like mind, body, spirit, and is trying to become the best version of himself and the best version of a fighter that he can be. He has a tireless pursuit of perfection, not necessarily in the pursuit of just winning, but in the pursuit of I just want to be as great as I can be and develop a level of mastery that, the highest level of mastery that I can.
So it's a good example of that, like George St. Pierre.
I would call George St. Pierre a martial artist. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think he's the perfect example of that. It's the reason he's one of my all-time favorites. And I think he really encompasses that so well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's
So it depended on that, right? The whole point of that
Right.
was, so I think wherever you sit on that
Mhm.
might have a lot to do with like which modality of training is going to work for you.
somebody's personality. That's going to
Right.
be their mindset.
Well, and I think to your point, like if you're an athlete and you come up with that competition and you're a high level college wrestler, right? Probably that sort of discipline going through your training through MMA, that sort of same mindset is going to work for you to learn the best in boxing or any
Absolutely.
of those other skill sets.
You can get all of those things to work for you. We've seen world champions come, I think, from every one of those molds. I think what's really fascinating to me is when the athlete and the martial artist merge, or when all three merge, really, because let's say what I see, if you just take them purely, right, and they don't have an athlete maybe doesn't have any of the other attributes, so he's purely a fighter, right? So he's maybe not the most technical, but he's tough and he will keep fighting, right? And you can't get that guy to go away. He's just going to keep coming at you, right? Sometimes the athlete doesn't have that.
Right.
Sometimes the athlete folds when it turns into a fight, when it's no longer a competition, right? And now it's a fight. And now there's a level of will that has to be mustered up that the athlete might not have.
Right, because now we're getting into mindset, right?
Yeah.
The mindset of the individual in the fight itself.
Whereas, and then the martial artist who's on that path to perfection. So like if you can merge all three of those things, then you have a very, very dangerous person.
There's always a balance.
Yeah. So if you can create that balance, and I think ultimately that's what the martial artist is the balance between the athlete and the fighter.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good point.
You could also say if a guy is a black belt in jiu-jitsu, did Muay Thai for years, maybe was a high school state champ wrestler, right? But either A, couldn't combine them all in a way for MMA, or B, just doesn't have that killer instinct to be in the cage. Doesn't matter what he knows.
Yeah.
Listen, I know guys like this. I know guys that were studs in high school in wrestling, right? I know guys and grew up with like very, very comprehensive striking backgrounds, all the talent in the world, and just didn't have the head for competing, right? For competing in a fight. A fight is very, very different than competing in anything else. It really is, man. Like I would say wrestling is the hardest sport that I've ever participated in physically. I would say that fighting is the most stressful. MMA fighting is the most stressful.
You mean stressful mentally? In combination both.
Yeah, just everything involved. And there's so much involved. There's so much involved in an MMA fight. And and that being said, I've fought Muay Thai in Thailand a couple of times, and that's by far the most dangerous thing that I've ever participated in. I wasn't stressed about it. Training is hard, but it's not as hard as wrestling. But yeah, an MMA fight is fucking stressful. It's real stressful. And yeah, so
so in like when we compete in wrestling or jiu-jitsu or whatever, right? You may get hurt, right? There's always the possibility you're going to get hurt. But when you have an MMA fight, chances are you're really going to get hurt. Like and seriously, you could seriously get hurt. Is that what causes a big chunk of the stress, or is it just like the winning aspect? Like what causes that stress?
Here's what causes the stress, right? I'll go out on a limb and say this is for most fighters, okay? If you fight in a cage for money, chances are something went wrong in your childhood, right? As Chris Lieben brilliantly put it, right? You could compare fighters to strippers, right? So there's a very similar mentality going on there, okay? Women, if they don't have anything else to do, right, they get celebrated for their sexuality. Okay, you can get on a pole, right, and people will applaud you, and you'll get attention, right? Men get celebrated for their ability to be violent. You get in a cage, right? If you can fight, even if you don't fight in a cage, and everybody at the bar knows you're the toughest guy there, you're going to get a couple free drinks.
Social status,
right? There's a social currency.
It's a social currency. Exactly.
So I'll use myself for an example, right? And I know this is a fairly universal thing. Fighting, if you listen to what I said at the beginning of the podcast, was the only identity I had. It was the only source of love that I had. Okay? It was the only source of me feeling good about myself that I had in my life. Now, not everybody is like this, right? But I think a large degree that this plays a factor. So now, am I going to have reason to love myself or fucking despise myself after this fight? Well, it's going to be dependent if my hand gets raised or not. Okay. Okay, that is a tremendous amount of stress to carry with you into anything, right? If you're gonna like yourself or not, or despise yourself and hate yourself and have no value for yourself based on a win and a loss, that's heavy.
Right. Yeah.
Right? That's fucking stressful.
Yeah.
What could be more stressful, right? Than I'm not going to be comfortable in my own skin for months if I lose. Yeah. Right. That's fucking tough, man.
That's a point I've never.
It feels
heard.
like someone died close to you, and you would have rather someone died.
And you know that's how you're going to feel if you lose.
Right. If you lose,
That's where it comes from.
Yeah.
Now, do you think so? It's almost like you're saying you're either here, right? So you win, you're way up here. You lose, your way down here, like where you're.
The difference is when you win,
right?
You're here for a few seconds,
Uh-huh.
right? And then you got to do it again. If you lose, you're here for a lot longer time.
So what helps you and maybe other fighters, or how can you help other fighters, right? With this, like, get back when you do lose, because everyone's going to lose, right? Most people have a loss somewhere on their record. So what gets you to get at least climbing back up, right?
So because this affected me so deeply as a fighter and an athlete, what I really encourage the athletes that I work with and is let's get a hold on why this dynamic is existing in the first place before we even get in there. Okay. So let's do the work to where our identity is not wrapped up in the winning and losing, but in the effort, because ultimately the only thing that you control is the effort, right? So if I can get an athlete to buy into that, and this takes work, man, this is not easy. And this is why I'm not the coach for everybody. If you don't want to do this work, please don't ask me to coach you, because I don't work with people that don't want to work on this part of the game. You're going to have to look at some dark stuff if you have this within you already, right? You already have this sort of dichotomous thinking about winning and losing, and you're carrying that with you. There's a reason, right? And often has to do with a lot of trauma and dark, ugly stuff that's much easily pushed under the rug, right? So let's start talking about that. Let's start talking about all the things that you're afraid of, right? And if you regularly start leaning into things that you're afraid of, you start to build confidence, because you realize, it's my experience and a lot of people that have been in similar work, a lot of what's underneath there is a boogeyman. It's nothing, right? We have ideas about it. I have fears about it, but when I really look, there's not a lot there. Right? There's these old stories that a 5-year-old told himself to make sense of the world, right? And now I'm 40 and I can make a little bit more sense of that. And sometimes it's not so cut and dry. Some people need to get therapy and real help through some of this stuff, particularly if you've been a victim of abuse and things like that. But you have to look at it, because if you don't look at it, here's what happens. You can still become a world champion and be miserable. And that's the worst fucking thing of all, right? And I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen lots of times, right? Guys become world champions, Hall of Fame, the greatest of all time, and not happy, right? So because there's this idea that once I get here, this is going to validate me.
That's going to make you happy up there.
Not just it's going to make me happy, but now the world, I have some evidence to show the world that they should love me, right? But then it doesn't work like that, right? It doesn't work like that. This only makes you feel good for so long, and then you need more, and then you need more, and then you need more, and eventually it doesn't work at all. And then what do you do?
Yeah. So if you haven't resolved it in here,
if you don't resolve that stuff, if you're on a road where you're not looking at that stuff, I mean, fuck, what are you gonna do when fighting's over? Who are you now, and what do you have to lean on? Where's your identity, right? Where's the claps coming from now? If you can't clap for yourself and you need other people to clap for you to get by, you're going to have a real hard time when fighting's over.
Is that what we see, especially recently, like a lot of guys coming out of retirement to fight again?
I believe so.
I believe like they wanted that accolade.
I believe mismanaged money. I believe, there's getting back out there, having people talk about you again, being relevant. I think all that stuff, like if you've ever been in that world, it's really hard to let go.
It's all mental, like you said. It's like my grandfather used to say, it's all here in your ass.
Yeah.
Now you brought up the money factor. I mean, there's a lot of guys that and I don't know if you can speak to this too. It's like I think people, and I've heard it in on my mats here, some students like, yeah, I just want to be a world champion, everything will be set. And I'm like, no. You realize there's a lot of broke world champions out there. I think people think that just the title world champion is going to lead them to money and being able to afford things too. That may lead to a lot of depression in these world champions. It's no path.
There's a lot of value to being intentional about the things that you do in life, right? So if on your path to being a world champion, you're setting things up for yourself to be able to make money. Like, look, talk to Gordon Ryan, right? He will openly, he's the best model for this. He makes almost no money competing. If he had to live off the money he made from competing, I mean,
he's open about that.
Maybe he'll be okay. But he's a millionaire from fucking instructionals and setting himself up, marketing himself in a way.
His personality, right?
He's a millionaire from that. So I don't think everybody needs to be Gordon Ryan per se or carry his persona, right? But he was very intentional about the way that he set him up.
Well, and that's a good point, because we see this a lot. We see guys who have an okay, whatever, jiu-jitsu career, or they're okay at jiu-jitsu, but they're actually really good at branding themselves and marketing themselves and making money. And that's sort of how, what we're saying is, as an athlete, part of how you need to approach it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, or you could be making investments, or you could be doing anything, but you have to have an intention there. If the intention is, I'm going to be a world champion and by proxy, I'm going to be set for life financially, that's not how it works, right? And so a lot of times it's having good people around you. Like if you don't go on that path with the intention of setting yourself up, like Uriah Faber bought an entire street of houses so he could house fighters, right? That are ultimately he funnels into his gym, right? And then takes percentages off the top of their fight. Like that's how you set yourself up, right? And that's being intentional, right? That's smart. Not everybody has the head for that or has the right people around them telling them like, hey man, like, I know you just won this fight, but maybe we don't need to be going on crazy vacations, spending money on bottles in Vegas or just being crazy with your money. Like this stuff will run out.
Do you think they're not necessarily looking at their future, like going like, okay, 10 years from now, right? And is it also partially because maybe some of them, if they didn't grow up with anything, now or something, they have
100%, man. Listen, this is the craziest thing in fighting, right? If you got a guy on his way up, okay, sometimes they get like $300 for a fight. I've seen guys make less, right? $100 to show up and fight. I've seen guys give that $100 to the coaches, like, hey, thanks, right? Coaches, you don't make a lot of money off most fighters, right? You make very little off most fighters. That same guy that gave you the only 100 he got is going to bitch and moan when he's got to give you 10% of 100 grand. Right. So yes, that scarcity absolutely plays into it. And not every fighter's like that, but I've seen that so much, and it's still so shocking to me every time that there's a disconnect that, hey man, you don't think I was worth 10% of getting you to this $100,000 fight? Right.
Yeah.
And I've had athletes gladly pay me. I've had athletes pay me more, right? But I've seen that a lot to the point where it's like, wow, man, that scarcity mindset stays with you. It stays with you if you don't do anything to sort it out, right? So
address it. Yeah.
Fighting will give you a vehicle to get out of some bad situations, right? Absolutely. But if it's the only vehicle you have, eventually that motherfucker's going to break down. Right? You need to have another car. You have to have it if that's the only one, because it doesn't solve the problems, right? It masks them. It gives you a sense of worth. It gives some of us a sense of validation.
Right.
But then what happens when that's over? Right? Did you replace that with anything? Right? Did you come to an understanding of why you needed it in the first place?
Right.
Oftentimes, sadly, the answer is no. Right? And so people hang on too long. People end up in worse situations than when they started. Right? They end up with drug and alcohol problems. Right. They end up in domestic violence situations. Right. They end up in all these really sad situations because they became dependent on fighting to give them their worth. And then when the ride is over, it's very painful. And if you just, for whatever reason, don't have the capacity to find anything else, it's really tough.
Yeah, I mean, you see specifically in jiu-jitsu now, like you talked about the Gordon Ryan phenomenon. I mean, for years we just seen, the top of the sport was an IBJJF world championship at your weight, and these guys were just focusing on how can I win the match, and it became into you just seen, a lot of guys, winning by advantages. They're winning these gold medal matches, world champion level at, by advantage. It wasn't exciting. There's no personality behind it. There's no presence on social media behind it. But then I think a lot of people are realizing, oh man, I just got a gold medal at the IBJJF Worlds. That's the pinnacle of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then the answer was always open up an academy. That's not guaranteeing any future. You know what I mean? But you see now Gordon Ryan, you're seeing the personality bring into it where, you're seeing, are you exciting or not just winning by advantages now. Yeah. And then are you producing, money for yourself? It's not even like they don't own an academy. They can open one now in Texas. But you said you're making money with instructionals and things like that. It's a different model now.
Making millions.
Yeah, different model. Totally different model now.
And I think too, I mean, besides the branding, right? So the athlete branding themselves as a personality, it's also, looking at it and going, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, I think you can thank the super fight model for the success of the modern day grappling athlete, because prior to that, you'd have a few big tournaments a year, right, where we have something to get excited about.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we don't know what matches are going to take place or anything like that, right? We can speculate, we can do all that stuff. But the super fight model, regularly through the year, we have build-ups, we have trash talk, we have hype, we have speculation. Right? He's getting no way. We can have some arguments over who's going to win. Like, no one thinks Gordon Ryan can lose, so you're tuning in to see him lose.
Right. Yeah.
And you got that now.
And I think that's where I was going. Like, you look at people like Conor McGregor, right? People still, maybe some people still want to watch him. You know what I mean? But people wanted to watch it. He may have not have been the best fighter in the world, but people wanted to watch it because he made it entertaining. And people were willing to put their money out for the entertainment, not even necessarily for the actual fight.
Always entertainment. Why are most people not in great shape? Because of convenience. Right? Fast food, right? So people like fast food. They'll take, some of us that are jiu-jitsu nerds, we like to break down the technique, and we can watch what somebody might consider a boring match and enjoy the tactics of it or the strategy and all that involved and find that a little bit more nourishing than, pure excitement's great. Everybody loves it. Everybody loves sugar too, right?
Right.
So the fast food approach will always dominate, as opposed to something a little bit more wholesome and nourishing.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think with Gordon Ryan, you get both though. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
You get both. You get the best technician we've ever seen, right? Better than Marcelo, better than anybody. Like nobody has done what he has done to top level athletes, calling his shots on people and like, that's pretty fucking amazing, man. To call your sub on people, like
you give the commentator ahead of time what the move's gonna be.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So I think like you get both.
You actually count it down.
I think he's a very, very special guy. But I also think a lot of that has to do with the way John coaches those guys.
Yes.
Like all his guys go for the finish for the most part. In competition, I think they're encouraged to go for the finish. I think there's a lot of pride
exciting fights,
in them getting to the finish. And when you fight to finish as opposed to fight not to lose, you're going to get a different product.
I think that it was a perfect storm of different things, which is the next topic I want to go into. Speaking of John Danaher and the whole Danaher Death Squad and Gordon Ryan, all those guys, is, the whole previous model in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was train in an academy, get your black belt, get black belt world championship, open an academy. Now, flipped on its head because of the guys at Danaher's crew, at the Enzos, are now on their own. But I think it started with the fact that the individuality of those guys in Danaher, where the leg lock game, the systematized way that Danaher did the leg lock game, which allowed these guys to identify themselves in a unique way, start beating these big names out there and make a name for themselves. What do you think of that whole leg lock evolution, where that's come from and going and all that?
I think it's amazing. And I think
the landscape.
It's funny. I look at my wife as a purple belt, and she knows more about leg locks today than almost any black belt did 10 years ago. Right?
Absolutely.
Right? So to me, that's fucking wild. That whole premise is wild, because there was just no systemized approach to do so, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like guys that were known for leg locks, something they just kind of went and did on their own, and they would just go after them, you know? And there's like,
I didn't get into the heel hook game until I was well into black belt and started bringing guys in my academy here. And I'm like, you know, we didn't know any of this stuff. We got to know this stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, this is something, I use the analogy, and it may be a little ballsy, but the way Hoist Gracie in the first UFC would be karate guys, like at that level. If you're a karate guy now, in the sense that if you don't know heel hooks, that's how it equated. You're like a karate guy in the 90s trying to do an armbar.
I'd say so.
You know what I mean? Like, that's
absolutely.
how far behind people are with this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, I think was it Eddie Bravo who said, like, back when, like, I don't know what time frame, but the only way to beat a black belt was actually to, you know, originally the original foundations was to actually use tools and knee bars and things like that.
Yeah, people looked at it as a derogatory thing. Oh, you couldn't pass my guard, so now you got a leg lock.
Right.
But the guy at Danaher's, they would rather enter from the bottom. They're already on the bottom.
They embraced it,
Yeah, totally flipped it on its head. And it was Dean Lister that actually gave the inspiration to Danaher.
Yeah.
Who's just saying why you ignoring 50% of the human body instead of having this stigma that was brought to us of, oh, it's just a dirty move. No, you just don't know how to teach it and do it.
Dean would like, I spent quite a bit of time with Dean over the past couple of months, and you know, he would be telling me, like, after he would win a match, like, he would hear the Brazilians talking shit about him in Portuguese and just saying that he's dirty and he's this and he's that, and it's like kind
Still
of
tap.
yeah, but like, at the end of the day, he taps, you know.
Yeah.
So, I think it's wonderful. I think it's created a different sport. I think you can no longer say that the gi is more technical than no gi, and I would directly attribute that to the sort of the uprising of the leg lock game. I think, and everything has just gotten more technical because I honestly, man, it's like I'd probably give all that credit. I think because of the way that John has systemized grappling, I think he more or less single-handedly through his athletes, and then everybody else had to kind of evolve to compete. I think through that, we've seen where they're different sports now. It'd be very, very challenging to compete in both at a high level.
Yeah.
And I think it'll grow continually difficult to do both. Right. I think people will more or less have to choose. Why do you think the Rotolos train at Atos, right? Atos trains both styles. You don't see the Rotolos competing in the gi. Right. Right. And I think that's why. I think in the future, you have to be a very special human being to compete in both, because they're so different and they're so technically different.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how, you know, you see now all of the, not only sub only, obviously, but, you know, it's pushing towards no gi. It's more exciting. People are more interested in that. But really, for the longest time, you can only do heel hooks in no gi and sub only tournaments, because it was, and now all of a sudden, guess what? BJJ, because I believe they felt like they were losing money and traction, said, okay, heel hooks are legal now. Let's not make them as these crazy, dangerous things we made them out to be.
Well, there was an asterisk next to any big no-gi tournament that you win in the IBJJF, right? Like a mental asterisk.
Right.
Right? Like if ADCC is the same year as a IBJJF Worlds, I don't care who won the IBJJF Worlds that year. Do you?
Yeah.
No,
right? If you're honest, right?
Yeah.
What I know is the best guys were competing under the best rule set in this tournament. So now that there's a full rule set, it's actually submission grappling now, right? Not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now that winning a world title in the IBJJF actually has some merit for no-gi. Or any of the titles that they have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize the topic too of everybody saying, "Oh, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu should be in the Olympics." I think it has no business being in the Olympics. If anything is going to get into the Olympics, it's going to be submission grappling, because that's going to trace back to one of the oldest sports in human history, penetration. You know what I mean? So I feel like that whole argument of the Olympics, that they don't even realize that you need to be the worldwide governing body of the sport that you want to be in the Olympics has to be private. I mean, I'm sorry, it has to be a non-profit.
Right. So aren't we just saying, really, we're bringing back wrestling with submissions? I mean, come on, you know, like, you know, in some ways, right?
In some ways,
But I think, and let's just talk maybe about, like, you know, no gi versus gi again, right? Where, you know, everyone finds no gi a lot more exciting. Even when you're fighting, you find it a lot more exciting, right? Because it's constant movement. There's no gi sort of control, so people aren't getting stalled. And I think that's really, you know, we talk about being an exciting athlete. That plays a huge part into the excitement of when you're fighting. You know, it's not like we see. I mean, we did see at the beginning of the UFC people fighting in their gis, but that went away quite quickly.
Yeah, I think the pace and rule set also dictate like how exciting something is going to be. So I think just the IBJJF scoring system doesn't promote an athlete. It doesn't encourage an athlete to be exciting, right? The whole idea of winning by an advantage in a major tournament is insane to me. Like particularly past the semis, past the semis, somebody needs to score a fucking point. Otherwise, this is not definitive. This is nonsense.
Right. Yeah.
We can afford some extra time if we're in the semis of the Worlds or the Pans or whatever, because we're not truly getting to see who the best jiu-jitsu is, right? We're getting to see who maybe can game the rules the best.
Right, or who partially got to a position.
It's very unsatisfying.
Yeah.
It's very unsatisfying.
That brings up an amazing point I never even thought about is gi versus no gi, and just look at the IBJJF rule set. There's no gi worlds. There's a lot of no gi in IBJJF, but even though it's a faster pace, the rule set keeps it slow.
Yeah.
The guys can hang out in 50-50.
Right.
Now they can't because they just made heel hooks legal. But yet the point system and the advantages, people still have that in their mind, and it's going to change the way they push the pace.
Well, but think about it too. I mean, I know the IBJJF has like those combo points, like you go from whatever sweep to mount, right? But think about it. Most positions, you're sitting there for 3 seconds. So you're actually stopping the fight to some degree for at least 3 seconds before you're advancing, because you want to make sure the ref sees and you got your 3 points or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
So you're actually intentionally stopping the fight. Think about that as the aggressor sometimes too.
Sure. Not only that, these guys are on the same. These guys, black belts training for years. They could easily stop somebody, passing the guard. So the big points that could change the outcome, you don't see this. You see it on the score 0-0. What's going to make the difference is the advantages. So now you're fighting for advantage.
Guys voluntarily go to turtle. To not get a guard pass. Right?
Yeah.
That's not a good position in fighting.
Yeah, it makes it an advantage.
That should be in a point.
Yeah.
If you get to put somebody in a turtle position and you're able to cover their waist with your hand and hold them there, that should absolutely be a point. That is a terrible. If you go there in a fight, you're going to get brain dead.
Yeah.
Right. And you're going to like Hendo did to Fedor. You're going to get knocked unconscious from there.
There's a rule set me and you've been talking about that I really think could enhance even the sub-only challenge match game where everybody's no points. But now you're seeing sub-only guys are just letting people pass because it doesn't matter. They're really good at escaping side control. Even letting people get them in mount so they can get a leg entry. So I think there's still a way to make rule sets push the pace. Even though people, are saying, and it's true that no matter what the rule set, the athletes are going to make it in their favor to win.
Of course, that's called competing.
With your wrestling background, what do you think of the submission only, right? No points. However, the only points are what works in freestyle. Escaping, pushing out of the mat, 1 point, right? Standing up, escaping, that's 1 point. Takedowns, 2 points. Everything else on the ground, there's no points. Pushing the action. I really think there's a way to blend those two. Because,
adding escapes would make it really pretty
5,000 years at least.
Yeah, that would really encourage a higher pace. Like if
you're not getting pushed out of the mat, you're not going to want to be at the edge of the mat.
And what you're going to see too is if you're encouraging an athlete to escape, right, or for points, you're going to encourage the top player to be more pursuant, right, into keeping that control. As the top player has to pursue more to keep that control, there's a lot more exposure and risk involved, right, because you have to engage, right. If I take my weight away from you, there's an easy exit for you, right. You're doing technical stand up and you're going to be up on your feet. If I have to control you to keep you on your back, right, that's going to force me to stay engaged.
Yeah.
Now, in that forced engagement, there's a lot less stalling. There's a lot less accepting of positions. I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I feel like that, that could be really lead into way more exciting game and even make sub-only more aggressive in the going for the submission. I mean, what do you think, Flow Grappling? Let's talk.
What kills sub only for me is the EBI overtimes because I've watched so many guys stall. I won't watch Chael's promotion, even though he has great matchups. But it's 5 minutes and then a forced overtime.
Right.
It's like that's not real.
Yeah.
There's nothing real.
EBI overtime, but with the rule set we're talking about, and if there's tied points at the end or no outcome, it goes to EBI overtime. That's a cool mix. I mean,
I hate EBI overtime.
Yeah, well, just because that now you're forced in positions
because you didn't earn it.
Yeah. You're didn't
or there's a picture of you getting choked. Meanwhile, it was you were forced and your
Right.
parents were taken. You know, so yeah, I agree with that too. Yeah.
it's an
So
interesting
the last topic that I have in my head that I want to bring up is with your worldwide traveling all over the place. I mean, even MMA schools, Jiu-Jitsu schools. What's your opinion of the culture of the gym? Because I've always said, you know, there's no secrets in Jiu-Jitsu anymore. Everything's on YouTube. Everybody knows it. You're not seeking out any particular person for knowledge. It's the culture you bring to your academy. Do you allow everybody to expose their individuality, which was a big point you said? We're not just a cookie cutter. You can only work on certain techniques that I show. Like, I feel like what have you seen now worldwide that's different than, let's say, our local area in Long Island as far as the mat culture that you see?
You see everybody seems to be pretty cool for the most part, and you don't. But there's like in MMA gyms, sometimes like cross training can be a little bit frowned upon if it's a small city and like there's only a couple of gyms.
Like going to another MMA gym.
Yeah, going to another MMA gym. Sometimes just because of the competition market, like in Thailand, that's like absolute no. But it's not from the coaches; it's from the gym owners.
Wow.
Yeah, so the gym owners, and I mean, they're sponsoring a lot of these guys. They're investing in them. You know, they're putting money behind them to some degree. So I understand wanting to protect your investment.
Right.
It's like, hey, if we're sponsoring you, we don't want pictures of you over here.
right training
Right.
at other schools.
So I get that. So you
talk
do
about contracts.
Yeah,
and all sorts of other stuff.
you do get some of that stuff going on. I find the rest of the world is so much more eager to learn. I think Americans, if you live in a place that's pretty dense, are super spoiled, right? Super spoiled for the most part. It's like, oh, okay, this guy's coming in today, and you know
Right.
we're going to learn. But when people are in places that necessarily don't have the highest concentration of maybe world champions or just access to that type of stuff, they're way more appreciative. Like I love going to Australia, and I usually have like great seminar tours in Australia that the students and the gym owners and the coaches, they're so appreciative and so happy. Same thing in England. I found Asia, the gyms in Asia, when you travel around to the gyms in Asia, everybody's pretty much super cool all across the board. I haven't had too many bad gym experiences that I can speak of personally. I experience a pretty open-mindedness. If there is any like gym politics in a particular place, oftentimes it's because the city is there's only a few options, and so it's more out of like competition than being scared to let your students see what other people have. Whereas like in a place like Long Island, if an athlete wants to go cross train and the instructor's like not cool with that, I always have like a little question mark in my head.
Why are you not cool?
What are you scared of? Or what's that about? I mean, ultimately, you can't really say it's right or wrong or whatever. I guess it's whatever you want to do. Me personally, like I want my athletes out there experiencing whatever they need to experience to get better, right? So whatever's going to facilitate the most growth of a student, for me, that should be an instructor or gym owner's primary concern.
Do you think it's also too, like, in the sort of beginning of jiu-jitsu, like it was competing against other people at a tournament? Now, if you're going to like an open mat, you're not competing, but you're training now with other people, so you're seeing how you stack up against them.
Sure.
It doesn't just have to be in a tournament setting anymore to see if your purple belt stacks up against someone else's purple beltness.
Yeah, and I think that's some instructors have some fear about that. Some are confident in their product. Some have some other different reasons too, man. I know some like pretty good instructors that have some weird things around like their athletes training in other gyms. And I don't know what that's about, because they're certainly not worried about like their athletes looking bad. I mean, I can't see that being the case with these guys in particular. So I don't know, maybe they don't want some of their stuff getting exposed to other people, or I don't know what that's all about personally.
I mean, I think like for an example, if you're in a highly saturated area, maybe a 10-mile radius, there's 10 schools, let's say there's so many schools. I think you almost have to embrace that. And if you are scared of your students seeing other stuff, you're going to lose them. I mean, and that's why here at my academy, I don't claim to know everything. I bring in specialists and I say, go train everywhere. Yeah. If I don't teach enough things and I'm afraid that people are going to go out, and you know what, they're going to go out and they're going to experience that and not going to want to train.
Yeah, I've had people like fly into like other cities and only train at particular academies because they're affiliates of like, and that's the only one my instructor said I can train at. Like, what the fuck is that? That's crazy.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. Because I mean, with wrestling, you've got to think more how we're going to grow this sport in the country and worldwide. You're not thinking, I don't want to, I'm going to compete at a local tournament with the next town over.
Wrestlers wrestle everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what's
I mean, what's interesting is too, like, when I travel too, I'll go train at like a school. Like, I'll just look up random schools, see like which ones have like the best like reviews or ratings, or or have a good reputation. I'll go train there. And what's weird is usually I find them weird. Like, what I mean? It's not the exact opposite. I'm like, oh, it's really weird experience training there versus, what I'm used to, Right. Yeah. So it's
different gym cultures can throw you off. I remember I went to train at a gym that wouldn't let me wear tights.
Well, like spats or like
spats or something?
Like just wrestling.
Oh,
like,
really?
Wrestling. No.
Like the
compression shorts.
Shorts underneath.
Yeah, now you got to wear shorts over that. I was like,
dude, they think it was your underwear?
Never train there again. And that's like high level instruction, but I was like, I'll never train here again.
Dude, it was interesting. We speak about how people are sort of odd. I was reading, I think it was on Reddit, and I was reading this one thread, and it was a blue belt, and they moved, right? And they were looking at schools to try out. And one school they went to, they didn't say what school it was or what affiliation. They told them they couldn't carry their blue belt over, that they had to start at white belt.
I've heard that.
That is like, to
I've
me,
heard
I
that
was
from
like,
some pretty well-known instructors.
really?
Yeah.
Wow. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. I know, like, a couple of like world champion instructors that are kind of notorious for that.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. See, I love just trying to get the feel of like just, worldwide academy culture to get a feel. Because I've always heard that West Coast Jiu-Jitsu is very different from East Coast as far as how the academies are run. But I guess it's everywhere you're going to find.
I think the no-gi's better on the East Coast.
Well, yeah. I mean, you got, DDS over here.
Well, now it's in Texas, man. I mean,
that's going to change some things.
Yeah,
that's going to change some things.
Texas is taking
I think the no-gi overall, there's some fantastic, obviously.
Well, that's a lot to do with the wrestling too, right?
Yeah,
a lot of transfer over from East Coast wrestling.
That too. But Cali's got some studs, and Cali's so dense with jiu-jitsu, but I think most people in California are, I'd say most people are primarily gi competitors. I mean, minus like 10th Planet,
right?
Autos, and maybe a couple of
West Coast is home of the worlds and gi worlds, and
very, very, very gi-centric culture, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah.
One more time, just give everybody a rundown on your instructional, where they can find out more about you and your social media.
Yeah, absolutely. So my social media, you can follow me at Eric the Gentleman. I'm sure they'll post a link underneath.
Absolutely.
And then EU Subgrappling is my course.com. There'll be a link provided underneath the video. And please check it out. It's a very comprehensive system of ground and pound. As I had mentioned during the conversation, just the ability to control and do damage at the same time, and understanding when one is more necessary than the other, and kind of playing that dance between the two, and like just really understanding how to dominate your opponent once they're on the ground. Punches definitely change a lot of things, and if you really want to have a complete ground game, understanding the fundamental difference between the sport grappling and when there's punches flying, I think will definitely serve you in that effort.
And then, so what's the next for you now? Recently married, and what's
married,
the next step?
And just kind of deciding what I want to do next. So I've just been heavily involved in some EQ training for the past couple months. So looking to incorporate that a little bit more into some of the coaching that I do. And I don't know, man. I don't even know if I'm sure I'm going to continue to work with fighters to some capacity. I'm not sure if that's going to be the only thing that I do moving forward. So looking to sort of like broaden some horizons and just kind of see what's available out there. I'm just down for the ride. I don't even know where I'm going to live next, to be honest. I don't know where I'll be living in 2 weeks.
Well, what's going on in the world? You don't know what's going to happen, man.
Exactly.
So we got to act accordingly. But while you're here in Long Island, we'll try to get you in the studio and film some more. Make sure you guys keep an eye on. Got some good unique content coming. with Coach Eric here, and then we'll try to get him in maybe once more before he goes
Absolutely.
off or
Figures
some
out
more
where he's
content.
going. Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, brother. Pleasure meeting you, bro. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, guys. Make sure you like, subscribe, share. Make sure you check out the newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter, and visit jiu-jitsumotivation.com. Thanks.